She drove 120 miles to see her sons. 10 days later, the creek spat out her bones. In North Carolina, not all disappearances begin in the shadows. Some vanishings are clean, methodical, almost too quiet to question, until the silence becomes deafening. At 1:17 p.m. on July 13, 2011, Laura Jean Ackerson left her home in Kinston, North Carolina. Her GPS coordinates logged an expected route, US 70 west to Raleigh. Traffic patterns that day were normal. The weather, humid but clear. She sent no final text, left no voicemail. She just got in her car and drove. It was a trip she'd made before. Her custody exchanges with Grant Hayes, her ex and the father of her two young sons, had always been tense but mostly civil. Family court had kept their arrangements rigid: pickup locations, contact limits, durations. Laura adhered to every line in the order. She'd been building a case, documenting, detailing. She wanted full custody. At 3:43 p.m., data from a nearby cell tower recorded Laura's phone pinging in South Raleigh. It was the last verified digital trace of her alive. 3 days later, her car was found still parked outside Grant's apartment complex on Hillsborough Street. No signs of forced entry, no visible damage, a locked door. The Raleigh PD's initial sweep found nothing overtly alarming, until the details were reviewed under protocol. Her purse was gone, but her suitcase sat unopened in the trunk. No outgoing digital activity after the Raleigh ping, no surveillance of her leaving the building, no confirmed witness saw her after entering the apartment complex. That same evening, Grant told officers she had come to see the kids, stayed briefly, then left. He didn't know where she went. He said, maybe she changed her mind. She's unpredictable like that. But court filings from Laura just weeks earlier painted another image. Grant has threatened to manipulate the custody arrangement in ways that frighten me. I need full protection in these interactions. I fear for my safety. That line, buried in a custody modification motion, suddenly seemed urgent. On July 18th, a missing persons report was officially filed by Laura's co-workers at Go Show Media. She hadn't logged in for days. No responses to emails, no video conference dial-ins, no remote deliverables. Officers were dispatched again. They entered Grant's apartment. A brief knock, a pause, and Amanda Hayes, Grant's new wife, opened the door. Cooperative, polite, controlled. She stated she hadn't seen Laura that day, claimed she was out running errands. Officers noted the apartment smelled strongly of industrial cleaner. The floor in the bathroom had a faint discoloration. It was noted in the field report, but there wasn't probable cause for further processing. Not yet. What was suspicious? The timeline. Too neat, too tightly aligned. By July 20th, the situation escalated from welfare check to active investigation. The Kinston PD transferred case jurisdiction to Raleigh Police Major Crimes Unit. The laptop from Laura's home in Kinston was seized, phone records subpoenaed, cloud account data requested via emergency warrant. Digital forensic teams began reconstructing Laura's activity. Last cell activity, 3:43 p.m., July 13th. Tower near Grant's apartment, laptop metadata. Last synced file, custody_notes.pdf, saved July 12th at 11:14 p.m. No outgoing emails after July 13th. No withdrawals from bank accounts post. July 13. The timeline didn't taper off. It stopped cold. What followed was protocol. Local canvassing, missing persons flyers, hospital checks, surveillance review. But nothing moved the case until a civilian call came in 10 days later, from over 1,200 miles away. July 24th, Richmond, Texas. A man fishing near Oyster Creek reported a strong odor and a large white object floating near the bend. Deputies responded. They assumed it was animal remains. It wasn't. What they found was not a complete body, nor something immediately recognizable. It was partial human remains, damaged, stripped, likely altered post-mortem. Back in Raleigh, the team received the alert. They didn't say it out loud, but every seasoned investigator in that room suspected the same thing. The call came in at 8:42 a.m., July 24, 2011. Fort Bend County Sheriff's Dispatch logged it as possible remains, human or animal, floating near Bend in Oyster Creek, south of Richmond. The caller, a recreational fisherman, reported a smell too foul to be wildlife. Deputies arrived within 45 minutes. The creek's bank was shallow, lined with cattails and broken limestone. Just below the surface, they spotted a white container partially submerged, tangled in aquatic weeds. When pulled to shore, the contents confirmed their worst expectation: dismembered human remains. No clothing, no ID, no wallet. No face. The Texas Rangers and Fort Bend County forensic units sealed the area. Photos, water samples, and preservation protocols were followed. Inside the container was a partially decomposed human torso. Limbs were severed with inconsistent depth and uneven blade marks, indicative of a non-professional. What remained suggested post-mortem dissection. The method lacked anatomical knowledge but showed persistence. There were no drag marks on the creek's edge, no shoe impressions. Deputies determined the container was likely dropped from the nearby walking trail or roadside turnout, easily accessible by vehicle. The forensic entomologist on site estimated the time of deposition between 7 to 10 days prior, based on larval growth, insect presence, and tissue texture. Fort Bend authorities escalated the case to homicide pending identification. 2 hours later, North Carolina's Major Crimes Unit received the interjurisdictional call. The partial remains, time frame, and disposal method were consistent with their missing person, Laura Jean Ackerson. DNA swab samples from Laura's toothbrush and hairbrush were expedited through CODIS comparison. Her dental records were faxed overnight. Preliminary measurements of femur length, spinal structure, and rib cage alignment aligned closely with Laura's biometric profile. Back in Richmond, a second container was located just downstream at 2:12 p.m. Inside, disarticulated leg bones, part of the pelvis, and a bag of human hair. Forensic divers continued sweeping a 300-yard radius. Over the next 24 hours, they recovered 5 additional containers, each containing human remains. No single container had a complete body, none were weighted. The scene report made one detail clear: the body was not dumped whole and later scavenged. It had been segmented prior to disposal. The remains were transferred to the Harris County Medical Examiner's office. Lead pathologist Dr. Erin Strout conducted the post-mortem examination. Her findings noted, dismemberment occurred post-mortem blunt force trauma visible along lower mandible and occipital ridge, discoloration consistent with chemical exposure, most likely a corrosive acid or industrial cleaner. No bullet wounds or stab trauma observed. Toxicology revealed no alcohol or sedatives. There was no evidence of overdose. CODIS match returned 2 days later, confirmed 100% DNA match to Laura Jean Ackerson. Raleigh investigators received an alert that Amanda Hayes' older sister resided less than 3 miles from the dump site. She was known to own a private property with unrestricted creek access. Grant and Amanda had visited Texas between July 14, 18. Bank records confirmed fuel purchases in Georgia and Louisiana. Toll booth imagery showed their vehicle, a rented U-Haul van, exiting I-10 just outside Houston. Investigators now had 3 converging layers. Geoforensic link. The Hayes presence in Texas aligned with disposal date DNA confirmation. The body matched the missing person. Physical evidence. The segmentation and container method pointed to calculated disposal. Still, no arrests were made. Surveillance began immediately on both Grant and Amanda. Their digital activity was tracked in real time. A second search warrant for their Raleigh apartment was filed, this time including evidence of homicide and body disposal. One internal case note read, either this was an improvised reactionary murder or a calculated custody elimination. We're about to find out which. The second search warrant was executed on July 27, 2011, at approximately 9:06 a.m. Raleigh police entered the apartment unit on Hillsborough Street with a forensic team, following probable cause developed from recovered remains in Texas and confirmed travel records. The apartment had been previously visited under a missing persons case, but no invasive forensic work had been permitted. Now, investigators were authorized to treat the space as a potential crime scene. From the outside, the unit was unremarkable. Upper floor, 2-bedroom layout, minimal furniture visible through the front window. There were no visible signs of struggle. That changed once the luminol test began. Crime scene technicians began with the bathroom, the last known shared location between the victim and the residence. Initial sweeps under natural light showed a recently repainted section of the wall behind the toilet, and new caulking applied around the base of the tub. These weren't enough to raise suspicion alone, but under blue light activation, technicians observed medium-intensity luminol reaction near the baseboards, along the grout lines and behind the sink cabinet. Spatter analysis didn't suggest high-velocity impact or arterial spray. Instead, it was consistent with secondary transfer, possibly from a body being handled post-mortem. Analysts documented drag patterns originating from the bathroom threshold toward the kitchen. A UV-enhanced trail showed irregular smears. confirming movement of an object or body across tiled flooring. The kitchen revealed further indicators. Beneath the stove unit, technicians recovered trace amounts of organic tissue, coagulated and degraded. A small piece of dark fiber was recovered, embedded in a floor vent. Mitochondrial DNA sequencing would later match it to Laura Ackerson. Behind the refrigerator, a hidden trash bag was recovered containing a pair of rubber gloves and 3 used industrial-grade cleaning pads. Both gloves tested positive for blood traces. Further analysis isolated epithelial cells under the glove's interior lining, belonging to an adult female not matching the victim. That DNA would be run separately. At this point, the case wasn't about just confirming what happened. It was about proving where and how. Investigators noted that certain cleaning supplies found during the first welfare check were no longer present. Specifically, a gallon jug of hydrochloric acid and 2 packages of rubber sealing tape seen near the water heater. A neighbor across the hall volunteered a statement that roughly a week earlier he noticed an odd chemical smell, like paint thinner or something rotten, coming through the ventilation. This led to a secondary sweep of the HVAC system. Within the apartment's ducting, a forensic team extracted charred organic debris. Based on mass spectrometry results returned later from the lab, this material had undergone exposure to high temperatures and acidic agents, though it was too degraded to confirm tissue origin. However, it confirmed attempts at localized incineration or chemical breakdown of biological matter. One of the more critical discoveries came not from the interior, but from the complex's external dumpster. Surveillance logs from the property manager were incomplete, but waste removal logs revealed a service call placed for bulk item removal on July 14th, 1 day after Laura's last known location, ping. No video footage remained, but interviews with waste service personnel confirmed a pickup of a heavy ice chest and 3 sealed totes. Unfortunately, their contents had already been processed out of state. Digital forensic technicians performed a concurrent sweep of devices belonging to the residence. One desktop computer revealed recent file deletions dated July 15th. Using restoration tools, investigators recovered internet search queries including: how long does it take for a body to decompose in water? Hydrochloric acid to dissolve tissue? How to clean up blood from tile grout? These queries were made under a guest user profile. Internet history cross-checks confirmed the computer had not been used to access news outlets since July 14th. Most users leave behind passive digital traces. In this case, digital silence post-incident carried its own weight. There was still no confession, no eyewitness, no direct footage. But the pattern now was clear. The residence had been methodically cleaned. Traces remained, minute, scattered, but enough for reconstruction. Each forensic anomaly added another thread. There was no single overwhelming piece of evidence. But combined, the data formed a consistent sequence: entry, confinement, death, cleanup, removal. As investigators reviewed the physical and digital layers side by side, one conclusion emerged. This wasn't an accident, and it wasn't spontaneous. On July 28, 2011, a forensic vehicle unit from the Raleigh Police Department submitted a request to the Regional U-Haul Logistics Hub for access to rental records tied to an account under Grant Hayes. The request specifically targeted the time frame between July 13th and July 18th, the same window during which Laura Ackerson was last seen and later confirmed deceased. The rental log revealed a reservation initiated online on July 13th at 6:12 p.m. Pickup was completed the next morning at 8:03 a.m. from a location less than 5 miles from the Hayes apartment. The vehicle, a 10-foot box truck. Notably, the return did not occur in Raleigh. The vehicle was dropped off in Sugar Land, Texas, a suburban town adjacent to Oyster Creek, just hours from where human remains had been discovered. That return point immediately placed the transport under scrutiny. The vehicle was impounded by Texas authorities within 36 hours of the request and held for forensic processing. Inside the truck, the cab was intact, no damage, no irregularities, but the box compartment told a different story. The initial interior swab tests produced 2 positive results for latent blood traces. One spot was located near the corner floor rail. The second was found on the inner door latch, faint, diluted, but consistent in protein content. Chemical analysis determined the presence of human blood, partially cleaned with an ammonia-based solvent. Carpet fiber samples were taken from the base of the truck wall. Analysts observed fibers consistent in color and weave pattern to those collected during the search of the Hayes apartment. A control set from Laura's clothing was used to perform cross-comparison. While the match was not class exclusive, it strongly supported the theory that materials from the apartment had been transported using that specific truck. Most critical was the biological matter located underneath a recessed cargo anchor bolt. Using a forensic vacuum and precision scalpel extraction, technicians retrieved a fragment of epithelial tissue. DNA was processed through rapid PCR sequencing. The match, Laura Jean Ackerson. No other individual's DNA was present in that section of the compartment. Investigators also accessed the truck's GPS route log, enabled through the rental company's real-time tracking system. The unit provided a minute-by-minute travel trail with signal timestamps logged at cellular intervals. The route was precise. Departed. Raleigh, July 14th, 10:22 a.m. First fuel stop, Georgia, 4:07 p.m. Overnight pause. Mobile, Alabama, July 14th. 15 final GPS ping before manual disable. Baton Rouge, Louisiana, July 15th, 1:16 p.m. That last ping raised red flags. The GPS unit had been manually disabled, an uncommon event not performed by U-Haul personnel. Investigators recovered the device and discovered a cut data cord beneath the dashboard panel. Surveillance footage from a truck stop near Baton Rouge later confirmed the couple traveling in the U-Haul at that time, though no audio or vehicle interior footage was available. The device was reactivated during check-in at Sugar Land on July 18th. That left a 72-hour window, unmonitored, between Louisiana and Texas, enough time to reach the disposal site, make multiple location stops, and return the vehicle. This wasn't a spontaneous drive, it was a cross-state logistics operation. Measured, routed, cleaned. Forensic analysts then turned to odometry data. Total mileage logged, 1,318 miles. Subtracting known highway distance and detours, investigators determined the vehicle had traveled off-route for roughly 140 miles. A secondary mapping exercise placed that distance nearly identical to the round-trip path from the sister's home in Richmond to an unregistered landfill area north of Brazoria County. This new lead prompted a ground search of that zone with cadaver dogs and terrain drones. No additional remains were recovered, but multiple partial burn pits were located. In one of them, a section of melted rubber and a scorched utility knife blade were found. Forensic trace revealed chloride compounds, a match to cleaning agents already logged at the apartment. No DNA could be retrieved due to combustion degradation. Back in Raleigh, investigators met to reconstruct the timeline of disposal. July 13th. Laura arrives at the apartment July 14th morning. U-Haul is rented July 14th. 18. Truck travels out of state, GPS disabled July 18th. Truck returned in Sugar Land July 24th. Remains found in Oyster Creek July 28th. DNA confirmed, truck forensics complete. The investigators noted the consistency. No erratic detours, no spontaneous stops, and no GPS activity that suggested panic or deviation. As one of them would later write in a case memo, "You don't rent a box truck, log 1,300 miles, clean the interior with ammonia, and disable GPS for no reason. This wasn't improvisation, it was execution." By the end of July 2011, the forensic evidence had begun forming a narrow corridor. There were now clear links connecting Laura Ackerson's disappearance, the Hayes apartment, a U-Haul vehicle, and the recovery site in Texas. But what stood out to investigators wasn't just the physical trail, it was the absence of panic. Crime scenes shaped by emotion tend to leave irregularities, broken items, smeared blood, scattered timelines. This one didn't. Each move, post-mortem handling, chemical cleanup, body transport, and concealment, had followed a logical, albeit chilling progression. That level of sequencing pointed toward forethought. And in forensic psychology, predictability rarely operates alone. The behavioral analysis team began by mapping the relationship history between Laura and Grant. Their custody case had been volatile. Grant's history with family court records showed a pattern of evasiveness, including previous claims that Laura was mentally unstable and unfit. These accusations had not been substantiated in court, but they were consistent, appearing in nearly every legal filing since the couple's separation in 2009. Amanda Hayes was not part of those original filings. She entered the narrative after Grant had already lost temporary custody. Investigators reviewed her personal records, no prior arrests, minimal online presence, sporadic work history in acting and hospitality. She had no legal ties to Laura, no children of her own, no public reason to escalate the custody battle. But from interviews and digital tracebacks, a pattern began emerging. Amanda was present at nearly every major interaction involving the children since she and Grant had moved in together. When Grant was denied visitation, Amanda accompanied him to appeal hearings. When Laura filed for enforcement, Amanda was CC'd on multiple emails, even when not legally required. Digital forensic review of Amanda's devices uncovered dozens of messages and notes referencing Laura directly. Some were copied from legal language. Others were more personal, critical, obsessive, cataloging Laura's behavior and routine with the children. One file was labeled Custody Timeline Proof. It included screenshots of old Facebook posts, transcribed text messages between Grant and Laura, and even third-party opinions on Laura's parenting collected from anonymous emails. None of this material was illegal, but it was curated, deliberate, and privately stored. That indicated motive building, not in response to a single event, but over time. As part of the behavioral investigation, Amanda was brought in for a second formal interview on August 1st, this time under the supervision of a federal profiler. The tone was calm. She didn't request an attorney. Her initial statements were consistent with what she had said before, that she had not seen Laura on July 13th, that she had no knowledge of a trip to Texas, and that Grant had handled everything. But investigators now had verified travel logs, blood evidence, and deletion timestamps. Rather than confront Amanda outright, they focused on indirect pressure, asking her to explain inconsistencies in fuel records, why her phone was disabled for 3 days, why her email account showed new device logins from hotel Wi-Fi in Mobile, Alabama, and Houston, Texas. Amanda paused. She asked to take a break. She didn't invoke her rights. She didn't admit to anything. But her posture changed. Her answers shortened. Her breathing pattern elevated. The profiler noted a physiological response to stress, not at the mention of Laura, but when questioned about planning. This was a crucial shift. Not all suspects react to grief, but most respond to confrontation around control. Amanda didn't falter when asked about death. She faltered when asked about preparation. Meanwhile, Grant's behavior had become more guarded. Phone records showed he made several calls to legal counsel immediately after the U-Haul vehicle was seized. He did not respond to repeated interview requests. When served a preservation order on his devices, his attorney filed a motion for suppression within 48 hours, citing harassment. A forensic linguist was assigned to analyze Grant's prior email correspondence, particularly messages to third parties referencing Laura, custody rulings, and Amanda's frustrations. The tone was controlled but dismissive, often shifting responsibility to court systems or unfair treatment. In one email, he wrote, "We have to find a way to shut this down before she costs us everything." That line was isolated for contextual analysis, not as a confession, but as an insight into motive escalation. At this stage, law enforcement began weighing their options. They had physical evidence pointing toward Laura's death occurring at the apartment. They had a confirmed cross-state transport. They had behavior suggesting premeditation. But they didn't yet have a statement, confession, or uncontested visual proof of the act itself. Investigators returned to data synthesis, surveillance placement, cell tower mapping. They requested further metadata from deleted email accounts and recovered cloud-stored document drafts. The goal was not just to tie the suspects to the crime, but to establish intent. That meant going beyond blood patterns and vehicle logs. It meant proving that someone sat down, made a decision, and followed through. And the signs were there, in the phrasing, in the omissions, in the way both suspects reacted, not when asked what happened, but when asked why it happened. On August 3rd, 2011, the Wake County District Attorney's Office convened an emergency meeting with lead investigators, state forensic analysts, and members of the Behavioral Threat Assessment Unit. The consensus was clear. The investigation had moved beyond the boundaries of circumstantial suspicion. They were now preparing for indictment. What remained was alignment, translating over 3 weeks of forensic and digital findings into a sequence the court could follow. Each point had to connect: timeline, motive, method, concealment. No assumption could survive without traceable support. The Hayes case wouldn't be tried by instinct. It had to be won by evidence. The initial prosecutorial strategy hinged on 3 key angles: forensic footprint, The presence of Laura's DNA and biological traces inside the Hayes apartment and in the rented U-Haul truck. Transport-linked GPS logs, mileage analysis, and the recovery of her dismembered remains in containers connected to the suspect's travel route. Behavioral buildup, documented hostility, timeline manipulation, and calculated post-mortem disposal, suggesting premeditation. The challenge wasn't just proving that Laura was killed, it was proving that her death was intentional and orchestrated. On August 4th, first-degree murder charges were filed against Grant Ruffin Hayes and Amanda Perry Hayes, accompanied by conspiracy and evidence tampering counts. The arrest was carried out quietly, early in the morning. Both suspects were taken into custody without incident. No confessions were made, no statements were offered. At the bond hearing, prosecutors requested full remand. The judge reviewed a sealed affidavit summarizing the investigative timeline. It included a partial quote from Amanda's second interview, non-incriminating on its own, but noted for inconsistencies under material scrutiny. Bond was denied. Both suspects were assigned public defenders, and gag orders were issued. The case moved quickly toward grand jury review. With the suspects in custody, the prosecution began shaping its formal timeline. It started with July 13th, 3:43 p.m., Laura's last cell ping, and ended with July 24th, when human remains surfaced in Oyster Creek. Prosecution theory, internal outline. July 13th. Laura arrives in Raleigh to visit her children per custody agreement. She is last digitally tracked to the Hayes apartment area. Between July 13th, 14. A confrontation occurs inside the apartment. Laura is killed. Evidence suggests blunt force trauma to the head, no immediate signs of defensive wounds. Post-mortem phase. Body is dismembered using non-specialized tools. Bleach and hydrochloric acid are used to clean surfaces. Biological residue is missed in trace quantities. July 14th. A U-Haul truck is rented by Grant Hayes. The body, sealed in containers, is loaded for transport. July 14th, 18. Grant and Amanda travel cross-state, disabling GPS and traveling via secondary routes to avoid detection. July 18th. Vehicle is returned in Sugar Land, Texas. July 24th. A fisherman discovers body parts in Oyster Creek. Matching DNA and decomposition analysis confirms identity and timeline. The entire arc unfolded within 11 days. What helped prosecutors was the mechanical clarity of the case. It wasn't complicated by unclear timestamps or incomplete evidence. Each layer corroborated the next: forensic, digital, testimonial, environmental. Even Amanda's silence became a tool. In the absence of a viable explanation for the trip, the simplest inference, conscious avoidance, grew heavier. One significant tactical decision involved not charging one suspect over the other. Prosecutors chose to pursue them as co-conspirators. By presenting the crime as a joint operation, the state avoided pretrial arguments that one acted without the other's knowledge. The strategy paid off early. In response to the joint charging, Amanda's legal team filed a severance motion, hoping to split the trial and reduce exposure to Grant's actions. The judge denied the motion. Amanda and Grant would face trial together. Meanwhile, Laura Ackerson's family was officially briefed. They had been kept informed during the investigation, but now they were shown autopsy results, the transport timeline, and the full extent of what had been done to her. It was not a procedural formality. It was a reality they were required to carry into court. Prosecutors also prepared for defense counterpoints. No confession, no direct eyewitness, no definitive cause of death due to body condition. To address these gaps, the state leaned heavily on forensic sequencing. Every item found in the apartment, every time-stamped image, every digital action left behind by Grant and Amanda would be framed not as isolated facts, but as a chain. The Hayes' own decisions had written that chain, and the science would hold it together. The pre-trial phase of State of North Carolina, v. Grant Ruffin Hayes and Amanda Perry Hayes, opened under the weight of national attention. A local custody dispute had escalated into an interstate homicide investigation, and the DA's office had laid out one of the most intricate forensic timelines the Wake County Court had seen in over a decade. But before that evidence could be heard by a jury, the court had to decide what evidence could be heard at all. On August 29, 2011, a Rule 403 hearing was scheduled to review the admissibility of the state's forensic submission. The defense filed multiple motions for suppression, targeting specific categories: post-mortem tissue DNA, luminal positive flooring, GPS tracking from the U-Haul, and the digital file labeled Custody Timeline Proof recovered from Amanda's personal device. Each of these was deemed by the state as critical to the prosecution's theory of premeditation. The first challenge was the luminol trail. Defense attorneys argued that the presence of blood was inconclusive without a time marker. Their claim was that Laura, as the biological mother of two children living in the apartment, may have bled there previously. The state countered with forensic sequencing. The residue included epithelial tissue embedded in grout seams, which aligned with trauma patterns inconsistent with normal household injury. A DNA match to Laura was confirmed. The court ruled the luminol evidence admissible. Next, the U-Haul GPS logs. The defense claimed a violation of privacy, asserting that the rental contract did not explicitly warn of active tracking. However, rental agreements under North Carolina law do not require express notification when GPS monitoring is used to track vehicle location for business purposes. The prosecution presented the full digital path, time-stamped, preserved, and unrebutted. Motion to suppress, denied. But the biggest legal battle centered on the custody timeline document. The defense argued that the file was inadmissible character evidence, compiled without Laura's consent, representing unverified allegations. The state didn't argue that the file was factual. They argued it showed motive intent. Amanda had been documenting Laura's movements and compiling material useful in a custody dispute well outside the bounds of formal litigation. The judge permitted the file under Rule 404(b), pattern of behavior relevant to intent. The court's rulings gave the state nearly full latitude to proceed with their narrative, one built on layered evidence, structured preparation, and a jointly executed plan. By early September, the task shifted to jury selection. With two defendants on trial for the same crime, attorneys expected complications. Both sides filed motions for expanded voir dire. The court approved a 175-person jury pool. The DA's office began with standard disqualifiers: employment in law enforcement, knowledge of the parties involved, and exposure to media bias. But they were equally focused on potential jurors' understanding of forensic evidence, not just whether they trusted DNA, but whether they understood how circumstantial sequencing could create a causal chain. One prospective juror was struck after expressing disbelief that a computer trail could prove intent. Another was dismissed after stating they believed mothers always had custody by default. Neither party wanted a verdict based on ideology. They needed logic, pattern recognition, capacity to connect facts in sequence. Amanda's defense team pushed hard to remove jurors with medical backgrounds. Their concern was that jurors with technical knowledge might understand decomposition timelines and acid use in a way that undercut their accidental death theory. The court allowed each side 15 peremptory strikes. Jury selection lasted 7 days. With a jury impaneled, the court issued a final evidentiary ruling. Digital device metadata, including deletion logs, and device location data would be admitted, but speculative interpretation would not. That meant prosecutors could show that Amanda's phone was wiped on July 15th, that Grant's email drafts stopped suddenly after July 13th, and that both devices traveled with the U-Haul, but they could not speculate out loud about why unless tied to forensic markers. It was a tactical limitation, but one the state expected. The facts, they believed, would speak loud enough without embellishment. Meanwhile, outside the courtroom, the public narrative tightened. The DA's office maintained strict press silence, but court records were public, and the media moved quickly. Laura's friends and family issued no inflammatory statements. Her name, they said, would be protected by the truth. What hadn't yet entered public discussion, what remained redacted, was the final autopsy sequence. That evidence would not surface until testimony began. Until then, what jurors knew was limited to procedure. A young mother disappeared. Her remains were found over 1,200 miles away, and two people now stood trial for orchestrating her death. As opening statements neared, the court recessed for 48 hours. The pressure was no longer forensic. It was human. Would 12 strangers, after months of preparation, thousands of pieces of evidence, and hours of legal debate, connect the threads? That question would be tested under oath. On September 17, 2013, over 2 years after Laura Jean Ackerson was reported missing, the trial of State of North Carolina versus Grant Ruffin Hayes and Amanda Perry Hayes began in Wake County Superior Court. The courtroom was tightly packed. Rows of press seats filled early. On the prosecution side, stacks of documents and carefully labeled forensic exhibits sat ready. On the defense's side, 2 tables, 2 defendants, and a unified strategy. Reasonable doubt. This trial wasn't about identifying the perpetrators. Both defendants were already charged, and the forensic trail was extensive. The central question presented to the jury was whether the killing of Laura Ackerson was premeditated. The state's position was clear. The murder had been planned, executed, and concealed with intent. The prosecution opened by laying out a precise timeline. Laura was last seen on July 13, 2011. Her phone stopped transmitting by 3:43 p.m. Her car was left in the apartment parking lot. 5 days later, her dismembered body parts were found in Texas waterways. The connection between those points, they said, would be supported by hard science. The most critical witness was Dr. Lawrence Scott, the medical examiner who performed the autopsy in coordination with Texas authorities. She described the recovered remains, severed limbs, preserved soft tissue, and evidence of chemical corrosion. The decomposition process had been intentionally interrupted using acid solutions. Tissue had been removed in a pattern suggesting a lack of professional training, but high intent. Despite damage, she was able to identify post-mortem disarticulation, meaning the body had been dismembered after death. DNA analysts followed, confirming the remains matched Laura's known samples, and the traces of her blood were found on a hacksaw blade recovered from a trash container behind a commercial supply store, one visited by the suspects hours before leaving Raleigh. Surveillance footage placed them there, buying gloves and cleaning supplies. Then came the digital forensics expert. Using data recovery tools, he testified to the presence of deleted location logs from Amanda's phone and emails from Grant's account referencing removal options and final trip details. While not explicit, these messages were timestamped precisely within the murder window. One email, recovered in fragment form, included the phrase, "We can't afford another custody battle." The defense challenged the evidence's interpretation, suggesting a sudden argument gone wrong, followed by panic. They called a forensic psychologist to argue Amanda's submissive personality, implying coercion by Grant. But under cross-examination, that argument weakened. Amanda had rented the vehicle. Amanda had purchased supplies. Amanda's own device held the custody timeline documents. These weren't signs of passive submission. They were signs of preparation. Perhaps most damning was the state's presentation of the journey map, GPS verified day by day. From North Carolina to Texas, stops along the route, fuel charges, hotel check-ins, the U-Haul drop-off. Each movement aligned with cellular data from both defendants' phones. No single piece was definitive, but together, the framework was undeniable. The final witness was a friend of Laura's who described her state of mind before the trip to Raleigh. She had been nervous but hopeful. She believed she might reach an agreement about the children. She had made a dentist appointment for the following week, bought groceries. She had not been planning to disappear. Deliberations lasted 4 days. On the morning of September 26, 2013, the jury delivered a unanimous verdict. Guilty of first-degree murder for Grant Hayes. Guilty of second-degree murder for Amanda Hayes. The court accepted that Amanda's role, while extensive, did not meet the threshold for premeditation established in Grant's case. Both were found guilty of obstruction and conspiracy. Grant Hayes received a life sentence without parole. Amanda Hayes was sentenced to 13 to 16 years in prison. The sentencing hearing was brief. Laura's family did not deliver a victim impact statement in open court. A written one was submitted, citing the impact on her children and the irrevocable damage caused by the method of her death. Outside the courthouse, District Attorney Colon Willoughby said only, "The evidence spoke. The jury heard it. This verdict is just." Years later, portions of this case were used in forensic training modules for law enforcement. Not because of its brutality, although it was gruesome, but because of how clearly it illustrated the intersection between digital evidence and physical crime scene reconstruction. Investigators were able to chart the full arc of Laura's disappearance through residue, metadata, and behavioral context, without a single eyewitness. Her 2 children were placed with family and removed from public focus. Amanda Hayes was later extradited to Texas to face separate charges for improper disposal of human remains. She was convicted there as well. As for the Hayes apartment complex, Unit 1201 was professionally cleaned, recarpeted, and eventually released. Few residents today know what happened there in July of 2011. But for those who worked the case, who reviewed the photos and followed the maps, and piece together a mother's final days, the location remains frozen in time. Not just a crime scene, a statement of intent. A reminder that custody battles can become war zones, and the casualties are never just legal. In the end, justice was served. But justice doesn't undo tragedy. Laura's story isn't just about a crime. It's about the quiet warning signs we sometimes ignore and how custody battles can become deadly when fear replaces communication. If sharing this case helps even one person recognize when a situation is turning dangerous, then Laura's memory has power beyond the courtroom. If this video reached you, I'd love to hear where you're watching from and what you took away from this case. And if it didn't resonate, tell me why. Every story teaches us something, even in disagreement. If this kind of real-life storytelling matters to you, hit subscribe and join us for the next case. Stay safe, stay aware.